Hello, everyone. It's Adelina Chalmers here again. This time, I'm actually hosted on Marc's system, so this will be an interesting one. I was really excited and keen to speak to Marc about strategy because it comes up in my conversations with CTOs a lot. And often there's confusion about business strategy. And I think I saw a fabulous quote saying that 93% of companies get strategy wrong anyway. So I'm really excited that Marc accepted my invitation to speak to me today. Thank you for coming, Marc, on the show.
Hi, Adelina. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks.
As you know, Marc, I don't like to do long bios, and I like to jump straight into the heart of the matter. So,
Sure.
and we only have half an hour, right? So, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with the basics, which is what is strategy? Can you give us a little rundown of that?
Right to the core of the discussion. Yeah. So
Absolutely,
I think
yeah.
that what I post a lot about and what I write a lot about is this. There is a lot of confusion about what is actually strategy, and if I start working with a company, if I ask 5, 6, 7 executives on their definition of strategy, you will have 5, 6 different answers, right? So I think the most important thing is actually to first align on what you call strategy, right? And then sometimes strategy is maybe your long-term plan. Sometimes strategy is about solving your biggest challenges that you have in front of you, right? And how you're going to do to do that. So I think the key thing is really to align on that. And my definition is it is about thinking about what are your ambitions, right? Looking into the future, kind of like zooming out into the future. So that could be the future of your industry, the future of your market, and the role that your company wants to play. Maybe it's just the ambitions that you have in terms of what you'd like to do, who you'd like to serve. And then kind of zoom back in and think about what are the key challenges that we are facing right now and that we can address in the next 12 to 18 months on our way to our ambitions, right? And then the third element is really the how are you going to address these challenges and what are the actions that you're going to be putting in place. So we're going away actually from this idea of many companies, they call something a strategy, but what they really have is a 3 to 5 year financial plan with kind of like wishful thinking in terms of the objectives that they would like to achieve.
So you said something really key for me there, because I also like to have something very tangible. And you said, what are the key challenges on the way to your ambition and your plan to get there? That's the strategy.
Right.
And I think that's absolutely important. One of the key things that I've seen, and please challenge me and debate me on this if you have different experience. So one of the key things I've seen when I work with CTOs on tech strategy is that the company vision is so confusing, especially for a startup. It's so blurry that they don't know where they're going. And this is why I think they find it impossible to create a tech strategy. And also, often they don't have a business strategy. Because I think, again, part of it is the fact that the vision is blurry. So my two questions to you here are, is the vision of the company as a startup being blurry, is that a big part why companies are startups in particular, are so confused about strategy? That's the first question I want to ask you specifically.
Yeah, I think very often people, they have these fluffy vision statements, and they think that's the strategy, right? So, and then they only say, well, we're going to be number one, or we're going to be this and that, and we're going to have, I don't know, 1 billion in sales or whatever, right? But that's not really a strategy. That might be a long-term goal. Very often, these long-term visions are also completely unrealistic. You know, if you are the last in your market, but you can talk about being number one as much as you want. How are you going to get there? And so that's the how part is then the strategy, really detailing what does that mean in terms of the customers we focus on, in terms of the products and services we're going to offer, in terms of why they should actually buy from us. That's a very interesting. I always ask my clients when we start working on strategy. So why do customers come to you? And it's very interesting how few are actually able to answer that question, right? And even have then a common aligned answer in the executive team on why customers actually buy from them. So that's the kind of things that you need to be very clear on. So whether you call it a vision or a mission or ambitions, I don't really care about that. So, but we should have some addressable, very specific kind of ambition, aspiration, goals that we would like to achieve. And I'm not necessarily talking about financial goals, right? So it's really about what kind of company do you want to be? Who do you want to serve? What is how do you want customers to perceive your company? These kind of things. So it could be very qualitative, right?
Well, I think that's spot on. And the other part of my question was, can you do tech strategy without business strategy? It's a trick question.
Yeah. No, so I like to think about it this way. So it's kind of like, the business strategy should drive the tech strategy, but tech should also drive the business strategy, right? So it's kind of like a circle going around. And what I mean by that is, obviously, I see lots of companies, they say we need digital transformation or we need data, and now it's AI. So it's very fancy to talk about these things, right? And everybody wants to have them. And usually when people say we need a tech strategy or we need an AI strategy, for example, what they're really talking about is we need to understand and make sense of this thing called data or AI or digital. And we need to think about what we actually can do with that. Now, I see very often that then digital, for example, people do, and they engage in digital, but they haven't really thought about how to actually use it well to achieve their strategic objectives. Right? So that's where I say you need to think about what is the contribution of tech to your strategy, right? And then the other thing is tech driving business. The question is, so how can tech help us, or what is the impact on tech on our business and our strategy in that sense, right? So if we say digital has a big impact or AI has a big impact, how can AI again help us achieve our objectives? But how does our strategy maybe also to change, or how does it need to change, taking into account the possibilities that technology is gonna bring to the table, right? So in that sense, I think it's a conversation between the business and the tech people in terms of helping understand how tech can help achieve the objectives and enriching the business strategy discussion with what tech can actually provide.
Well, I think, and that's, I would say, a key part of the role of the CTO, to help the business understand how tech can help the business achieve its objectives. If you don't mind, Marc, I'm going to deviate slightly from our original plan because we have a very good question from Eli Spans saying, is there such a thing as a tech strategy? Since tech supports the business, it should align with the business strategy as well. Like with finance, also tech is not making the company unless you run a tech company, but then it's your business. I will let you. Would you like to answer that question first, and then I can add my 2 cents to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're the tech strategy expert.
Yeah. You go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, Eli is what I just said, right? So the tech should support the business strategy, obviously, but then on the other hand, as tech is becoming so important in all kinds of industries, right? It is also a question about strategy, thinking about what tech can. Or what's the impact on technology on the business, and how does the business need to change because of that? So it's really on the business level also to think about how can we leverage the technology that is out there at the moment. Right? So even if you're not a tech company, if you are a service company, lots of service companies, they start to engage more and more with technology. They use things like process automation. Now. You have in the law industry, for example, there is more and more use of generative AI to help prepare contracts or to get an opinion on something, because they can just generative AI is just really good at collecting or analyzing a lot of data and giving you a kind of like a summary, right? So that's also how tech can be used in your business to become more effective in your business, to help you achieve your objectives again. And you need a strategy, I would say, for what are we going to do with that technology and how are we going to use it.
I think you're right. So for me, there's 2 things. You can't have tech strategy without business strategy. I mean, like Eli says, tech supports the business. Well, yeah, but essentially also you can't build a business strategy without having input from the tech department, because, right? I mean, we're sliding slowly towards the other question about who should I involve, but essentially you can't build strategy in isolation. Strategy starts from the military world, right? When they were looking at the plans, how are we going to win this battle? And if you look at at the way they were doing it, it wasn't just one guy coming up with all the plans alone in an office or in a bunker or in a tent. It was him and his generals and his captains or whatever the job titles they had, coming up and saying, well, there's a hill here, there's a river here, we can drown them there, sort of thing. So you can never create strategy as a single person, in my opinion. And tech strategy is just essentially how is tech helping achieve the business goals, rather than a completely separate document. We go crazy and do our own thing, which has been something that I discovered in some of my CTO meetings. They seem to think that tech strategy is completely removed from the business strategy. And it looked like an architecture document rather than a business document, which what the tech strategy should be as well. So that's really interesting. Before actually I move on to this point, I wanted to ask you and see if you've seen evidence of this yourself. There is an element that I come across often, which is what I like to call unconscious strategy.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, what from your opinion? What have you seen? What comes to your mind when I say unconscious strategy? Tell me.
I think about, when you say unconscious strategy, I think about this idea of emergent strategy. So Henry Mintzberg, I think already in the beginning of the 80s, he first wrote about this idea of you have your planned strategy, and then you have what really happens, and that's kind of like emergent strategy. And his definition of emergent strategy was actually, so you really, it's kind of like looking back and looking at the patterns of your activities, and then say, okay, well, this was our strategy. So and I think, and in my experience, in real life, you have part of what is planned. Again, you have your ambitions, for example. So you kind of start doing something, you start moving in the direction of your ambitions, but then stuff happens, right? There might be new challenges coming up, there might be new opportunities coming up, and then you kind of think about, should you seize them or not? And that's more the emergent part, right? Or in other words, you could say, you do something, you learn what works, what doesn't work, you learn what other opportunities are there, and then you adjust, and then you take it from there. So my idea of strategy is really, as I said already before, going away from that 3-5 year plan, but it's really more about what is the first step, and then once we climb that hill, you could say, right? We are a little bit higher and we see a little bit further, and then we can make a decision on what's the next step. So in that sense, strategy becomes, instead of being a kind of annual ritual where you update your plans or you do rolling forecasts and these kind of things, it's more of a iterative, always on kind of thing where you do something, you see what works, and then you take the next steps based on your experience, your feedback that you're getting from the market, from the customer, from your company.
Well, I'm really glad you said this, because as you saw in the comments, which you actually pointed out to me, rightly so, we had a question, I think from someone called Vincent, about do we need a strategy in this changing world? So to me, that question implies that it's something that you do once a year, just like you said, and that's it. You kind of put it in a drawer, and that's it, and you kind of keep, having to stick to what was decided a year ago. What you've just said again reiterates what I had in mind, is that it is a live thing, not 1 day away. Away days for strategy. They drive me crazy. I don't know about you, but I find that absolutely mental. So tell me a bit more what you think about that question. I mean, I think to be honest, you've already answered it before it was even asked, which is why do we need a tech strategy in this changing world? Yeah,
so I think implicit, as you said, implicit to the question is this idea of strategy as a long-term plan, right? So, and then obviously, you can't really plan 3 or 5 years ahead, because you never know what's going to happen. Right? On the other hand, let me give you an example of a recent client of mine. So it's a medium-sized company, some 200 people. They're making some 50 million in revenues, and they did not really have a strategy. So they were really entrepreneurial, they like to call it. But they were all over the place. So they had different business units, and they had hundreds of clients, and they were kind of jumping on every opportunity really that presented themselves. And then at some point, they were in a situation where it was very confusing. They were not really clear on what they should be doing, where they should be focusing. As a result of that, they were spreading themselves too thin across too many things. People in the company were complaining that they have too much to do. It's too overwhelming. It's too complex, and so on and so forth. So lots of problems, right? Then we started digging into the strategy. So we started thinking about it. We started looking at what are real challenges that they are facing. As part of the understanding part of the analysis part of the strategy work, we also looked into the financials, and we discovered that although they had hundreds of customers, only a handful were really profitable. And all the profit came from a handful of customers and only certain products. So that happens when you don't have a strategy. And that has nothing to do with the world changing, really, but it's really no strategy, lack of focus, doing everything, and not being aware even of where do you make money, which products work better than others, and which clients are better for the company. So we went into the strategy work, and then out of all these discussions came very clear how should I say, a very clear strategy in terms of what are the customers we focus on, what are the products and services we will be focusing on. We defined even thresholds for kind of if the customer is below a certain revenue, it's not our ideal customer, we're not going to go there. If the customer is of a certain size in terms of being too big for us, it's not an ideal customer for us. So they really just focused on who is the ideal customer, what will we offer them, right? And the whole strategy became much more focused. The organization came much more aligned. The strategy, the executive team came much more aligned on what is the business and what are we going to do. So even if stuff around you changes, your strategy helps to focus. And I think even in the more turbulent your environment, the more important your strategy is, in the sense of being clear about what are we going to do, what are we going to focus on, and what not. But again, if you think about 3 to 5 year plans, that won't work well in a changing environment.
Well, I think you were hinting at this as well, but one of the key things about strategy for me is that it helps you see what you should say no to.
Yes, exactly. Yes, as well. Yeah.
You kind of, otherwise you say yes to every single customer. And as you saw with your specific client you were talking about, not all customers are profitable. Not every product you sell is profitable, right? So absolutely spot on. So if you don't know, so can actually, before I move on to who you should include, and also look at the questions that João asked as well, can I ask you for a typical example of a mistake that people make, of a statement they make that they think is a strategic statement or part of a strategy, but actually it's tactics? Do you have something you could share with us? Because you've worked on so many strategies with companies. I'm sure you see a pattern.
Well, I mean, it could be. So talking about tech, we need to move to the cloud. We will move to the cloud. So that's a statement that you see a lot. Or we will use data to improve our competitiveness. So that's kind of these really fluffy statements that that I see a lot, which doesn't tell you anything about why, what problem is that really going to solve for our business? How is it going to help us to become better in serving our customers, in being more efficient, in being more effective, in leveraging our talent better, or whatever, right? So it doesn't really, there is no logic behind it. I think that's the other thing that's really important in strategy, that you say something, you want to do something. What is your theory behind why this is going to work? Why do you think you need to do this? Why do you think this is a good idea of doing it? Which then you can also test afterwards, right? So going back again to this idea of strategy is not necessarily a plan that you're going to put in action like this, but it's testing assumptions also, and then seeing what works and adapting to that.
But so what would a strategic statement look like in that sort of context then instead? You know, like I can happily kind of share my own ideas, but I'd love to hear just from your own experience. What would a strategic...
Well, I think it's a matter of how you then describe strategy. And I like using the playing to win framework. So where a strategy at the end of the day, it's you have to say, what's our ambition? What is keeping us from going there? Where will we play in the sense of who are the customers we will focus on? What are the products and services we will sell? What are the channels on how we reach our customers? How are we going to win? So what is our differentiator really? How are we going to, or why are we going to win with our customers? And then you need what are the capabilities we need, and how are we going to put all of this in place and manage the whole strategy and the whole business? So strategy, it's not really a statement like that, but it's really more a synthesis of all these different elements, I would say.
Yeah, so I mean, to me as well, for example, a strategic, if I I always, when I help someone create a tech strategy, obviously it's much easier for me because the business strategy normally will have already been created. If the business strategy hasn't been created, then that's why I actually like to have you as a contact, because like I say to them, okay, you can work with someone on the whole bigger process rather than just on. You can't create tech strategy. This is what I found. You cannot create tech strategy if there's no business strategy, because I keep asking the questions, and this is the thing that people say, we will move to the cloud, but it makes you my statement is, why, by when, where is it adding value to the business by moving to the cloud? Yeah, but also then if it is, for example, to me, so I'm thinking back into the military terms, and please challenge me, by the way, if you think I'm wrong, okay? Because I'm just coming up with an example off the top of my head. But to my mind, for example, if you say this type of customer data will be moved to the cloud, or will need to be accessible in the cloud, then it's something that that has to be fed into the, I suppose, the table in relation to some sort of problem or business advantage you are getting by doing this action, by doing this having this approach. But then all the tactics under it, I suppose strategy to my mind is an approach. Would you say you agree with that, or is that? Yeah,
as I said, so you have your ambitions, you have what is keeping you from achieving that, and then you have the approach on how are you going to solve the problem to actually achieve your ambition.
Yeah. Yes. So that's why I think of strategy in terms of as an approach. But if you move to the cloud, that's fine. What are you moving to the cloud? How is this helping the business problem? How is this solving the challenges we're facing? That's kind of, so to me, if I were to be specific, I would be saying something like, I don't know, 20% of our data related to B2C customers, if you sell to both, let's say B2B and B2C, will be moved to the cloud, because then that's part of so that, to me, that's a more strategic statement than, and then obviously you have the steps under that, the tactics of how are you going to move stuff to the cloud. Would you say that's, please break it apart and challenge it.
The key is what you alluded to is, why are you doing it? So very often we have these things like, we're going to move to the cloud, or we're going to digitize all of this.
Yeah.
What do we hope to get out of it? Right? And then be very clear about that. So then you have also your assumptions, and you can test them, and you can see whether this move actually helps you to achieve your why, your objective, or not. And if not, then you can adjust your strategy.
Yeah. This is fantastic. Thank you, because I really like having this kind of conversation on a few practical examples rather than just some general kind of advice on strategy. So I know we're running out of time, so I want to make sure we cover also this question of who should you involve in the strategy, and how do you execute? Sorry, I'm bundling two questions together. I hope you don't mind me saying that.
So when it comes to the involvement, I like to open up the strategy process for a number of reasons, right? So the first reason is, obviously, we always expect, or we know from change management, when we come to execution, if you have involved your organization in the development, then that's going to speed up the execution quite a lot. And most of the resistance you see when it comes to execution is because people then start asking questions about, I haven't understood it, why are we doing this, what does it mean for me, all of these things. So if you involve people early on, it's going to make all of that easier. The second reason is, we're going back to this changing world. It's kind of unrealistic to expect that a handful of executives at the top of the company, they know everything what's going on inside the company and outside the company. And the larger the company is, the more difficult actually this becomes. So that's also the reason why you need to involve people. So usually what we do is we have a core team, and the core team, so maybe it's like something between 6 to maybe up to 10 people who are on the strategy team. And obviously you have always the executive team. You maybe have some people from the first line who need to make the decisions really about what is it that we're going to do. And then what I like to do is open up the strategy process in the sense of, so first you have understanding what's going on. So what are the problems that we face? What are the opportunities we should be focusing on. So, and here you can open up and you can involve the whole organization actually in providing that kind of input. Well, that doesn't mean that you're going to do everything that everybody says, but you see the key themes emerging, you see what's going on, and then based on that, the executive team or the strategy team can make a decision on, okay, here are our priorities. These are the things we need to focus on because ABC. And then you have the next step. We say you have these focus areas. Again, you can involve the organization in. So, what would you do? What would you suggest in terms of this strategy on how we seize these opportunities, on how we solve these problems? Again, it doesn't mean that you're going to do all of that, but just to have a more informed decision actually on what you are going to do. And then once we have the strategy, I always like to say we have a first draft. And again, we involve people, we involve key stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, to get some feedback. So how clear is it? Is it clear? What is not clear? What do you like? What don't you like? What challenges do you see when we think already about implementation? So you do all of these things up front, and then you can adjust the strategy. And then obviously once it comes to the implementation, again, you involve everybody and you focus on you can involve people in terms of how are we going to implement. So in terms of strategy coming from the top, it's more the general direction, let's say, but then the specifics, and we're going back to this iteration also, the specifics of what are you going to do, how are you going to do it, you leave that to the organization. Here, a recent example, so a key pillar of the strategy was to improve the relationship with key partners of this organization. And we just said, okay, that's the direction, is we need to involve these key partners. We had some ideas on how we're going to do it, but then we assembled a team from throughout the organization who works on the specifics with these partners actually. So we bring these externals also into the process of developing then the specifics of how that strategic direction is going to be implemented.
So can I
involve everybody, right?
I know we only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to be super quick about this, and I just want a super quick answer for you as well. You mentioned the word key stakeholders. Could we give our audience some tips on the sort of job titles, or who are usually the usual suspects, the usual key stakeholders in companies?
Well, I think
some of that. Yeah.
So you have your leadership and you have your middle management, which very often is left out of the process of developing a strategy, but only then involved further
in
down.
the execution.
So I think that is a key stakeholder, thinking about your management. Then sometimes the board of directors is a key stakeholder because they have to sign off on the strategy. In some countries, even the responsibility for strategy rests with the board of directors. And although they very seldom, in my experience, want to be involved in the development, they want to be involved in the feedback and that kind of thing. Key stakeholders is also externals, so customers, partners, suppliers. So at some point, you might also want to think about involving those. And then in general, like we always say in change management, who is very important for the implementation afterwards? Who do you need? Who are the key people you need, even though they might not have the title, but they might have a strong network and a strong influence on what's going on in the organization, and they need to be involved. Like people involved in the workers' council, if you have something like that, might also be important to be involved at some point. So it really depends a lot on the situation, and usually we do a very classic stakeholder mapping, and we think about who needs to be involved when and where, and it's very context specific. In one customer I'm working with now, we did a big effort to involve hundreds of people. On the other hand, we had another client, a smaller company, said, well, we don't need to involve the board of directors, for example, but we will present the strategy. It's more part to them, and then they have to sign off on it, and that was about it. So it really depends also on the context.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Superb. I think lots of good ideas came out of this session. Unconscious strategy, it helps you what emerges out of it. So this is things to think about, guys, when you're thinking about strategy. I find that often people have an unconscious strategy, so try and think about that and see if you have an unconscious strategy. It's a live document, as Marc said. It's not something to make one day away and then throw it in the drawer. It's something that helps you say no. And Marc insisted, and I agree with him 100% on this, that it's about what is this fixing? What is this doing? And I actually have a little template for small companies that I've created with regards to the tech strategy, but I don't mind sharing. I can I will probably, instead of do a share screen here, I can just put it in one of the LinkedIn posts, or people ask me, I can send it to them. But I'm glad you said this, by the way, because the problem that you're solving is absolutely crucial. So before we end, is there any tips or any specific questions you want to tell people to think about when they build their strategy, or anything you'd like to leave as words of wisdom for our audience, Marc?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I just put a link also into the chat, makebetterstrategy.com, where you can download a free guide, which kind of brings you to the questions you should be asking. So I think about strategy as three types of activities. You need to understand what's going on in the market, in the industry, but also inside your company. So very often strategic challenges are more inside than outside. So think about what's going on, make sense of that. Then it's about designing options and thinking about which options would be most suited to achieve your objectives. How can you test these options? And then the third activity is really about activating your strategy. So three activities: understanding what's going on, making strategy, making decisions, activating that strategy, taking action. And do this in an iterative, kind of constantly always on fashion, and not just once a year you set it and then you forget about it and you check back in maybe 2-3 years.
Oh, that's a very good tip, Marc. Fantastic. I have a few questions to share from my side with regards to the tech strategy, at least. And I think you've covered a lot of these already, to be honest, Marc. So from my perspective, the questions I would like to leave you with is that if I had to summarize tech strategy in essentially 5 points, it would be, because also for a startup, for example, it's not worth planning more than 6 months to a year. And feel free to challenge me on that, Marc, if you have a different experience. Yeah. So for me, it's like, what does success look like by 2024? What are the problems we have to solve to get there? What is going to be done by whom and when? What are the resources that we need to make this happen? And what are the risks and assumptions, and how can we mitigate them? And those are some of the things that I always like to think about it when thinking about the tech strategy, at least. Marc, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining me and accepting my invitation to have a conversation about strategy. I might come back to you with some more topics to discuss, because I think you really nail it. And I love your practical approach to it, because I think the problem with strategy, and I think the reason so many people are lost about it, it's because it's so academic. People approach it in such a removed from business kind of way that I think that's one of the key reasons that people struggle with it. And when you're inside the business, it's very hard to zoom out. You said zoom out and then zoom back in, but actually it's very, very hard. I think this is why you need someone on your side. Thank you, Marc. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you. Have a great summer, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.